Thank you very much. Most of you would probably know that I mean it very, very seriously when I say that I think we should all be napping, especially given the very good presentations that we had before. And I'm afraid that I might be contributing a little bit to the interference effect. So I do apologize. I'll also apologize probably following on Scott Holland's opening remark that I'm not going to talk about reading. However, I am going to talk about motor fluency and specifically in hand movements and speech production. And because it's late in the afternoon, I actually have all my substance or what I would like to argue in the following slide. So first, I think all of you would agree with me that the acquisition of skills, such as reading skills, reflects changes in the brain. So no problem there. However, the point that I would like to argue is that practice can generate new knowledge. And importantly, I would say that fluency is, to me, a hallmark of a qualitative change in task solution. So in fact, fluency is new knowledge. And what I would like to argue for is that fluency represents a generative process. So I'll try to argue for these points. Now, just as a very short reminder, most of us consider two basic, although there are more probably, long-term memory systems. The declarative memory system, the procedural, and because we are interested in how to read or write, most of my remarks, of course, address procedural memory. Now, this is the simplified standard model. I would just like to say, because it is somehow related to what we do in interventions, is the idea that I actually tend to think that it's not the substance, what or how to that really matters, but that we have two memory systems, one for single experience learning, and which is actually important for chance and arbitrary events such as listening to a talk at a meeting, and the other is what I consider the more important one because it actually supplies us with deep knowledge about the structure of experience, but procedural memory actually requires repetition. So in a way, I'm going to speak about the importance of repetition. More than that, repetitions are mandatory if we want to set procedural memory processes going. So, my first point, I'm going to present 3 points. So here's the first point. Most of you will be familiar with it, so I'll be brief. We think in neurobiological terms that in order to generate long-term memory, we actually require and necessitate structural changes at the neuronal level. And what I want to argue is that it really means that new neural machinery and knowledge states are generated in the process. So this is not changes which relate only to quantities, let's say speed or accuracy, but we actually do something differently. We come up with a different task solution. So let me very briefly, because most of you have been exposed to the story, but I want to give a different twist at the end. So what we know that if we, for example, train on a sequence of finger movement, it could be the equivalent of a keyboard, playing instrument, it could be typing and so on. We have very nice improvement between performance at the beginning of training versus performance after training. And this is what we and others have been referring to as fast learning. However, the important point for me is that during the hours that follow such a training experience, or if you want, a training session, there is a latent phase of several hours duration. This is true for adults, young and old, during which, in fact, if we test performance at different time points, we see nothing. no change compared to the end of the session. If, however, we allow for time, and importantly in this task, time and sleep, then, for example, by the next morning, we actually see additional gains or offline gains, delayed gains in performance. Now, what you have here is a measure of performance, which was actually, I drew it as some indication of performance speed. But the important point is that overnight, there is also a significant decrease in the number of errors. So in fact, the next day, we are not only much faster than we were at the end of the training session, we actually have also far more accurate performance. So accuracy improves as well as speed during this consolidation phase, presumably triggered by the training experience, but taking effect only time and sleep after the actual training. So what I would like to argue, that if you are familiar, or even if you're not familiar with the concept of a speed accuracy and trade-off concept, which was actually formalized in a way by Fitz, you should think that what these data say, improvement in speed and improvement in accuracy, they actually say that there should be a new constant. So for each individual, we're actually now at a stage where the same task is performed with, if you want, new neural, I would say, new neural state, and perhaps even new neural hardware, if we look at the results of studies from animals. So the point I'm making is the following. What we have as a function of training is not only quantitative changes in some performance measures, but actually the generation of a new brain state, or if you want, qualitative difference. So let me continue with this point and go to point 2, just to strengthen this idea. So my second point is that practice generates new knowledge. And I'd like to show you an example which relates to handwriting. And what I'll try to argue is that the data suggests that knowledge of a different nature is available at different stages of practice. Sadly, as I'll show you, we can't shortcut. So we have to undergo the whole process. But importantly, practice makes for qualitative changes in performance. So definitely, task repetition and multi-session training is not more of the same. So here's the example. And what I'm showing you is data from a single subject. In fact, she is a professor now in Illinois. But what you see here is her performance on a task where she's shown these targets. I hope you can see them. Okay, I won't go into the details. The point is it does not appear. And what we train her is to write a new invented letter. So it goes from here to here to here and back. Okay? And importantly, what I'm showing you here is a velocity profile. So what you have is velocity in pixels per unit of time. And what you see here is time in seconds. You can see that it takes us, an adult who, in this case, knows at least 2 alphabetic systems, to write a very simple letter. It takes us about 5 seconds. And importantly, you can see that it is performed as 4 trajectories, ballistic trajectories, and in fact this bell-shaped curve indicates that what we are using, part of our automatic repertoire, and that there is, in fact, in between each of those segments, we rest and plan the next one. Okay, so there's an actual stop at each of these targets. That's the first session, and then you repeat the task, as you should in class when you learn a new letter hundreds of times. This is how it looks by the third session. just for brevity, I'll skip that and get to the 9th session, because what you see in the 9th session is, to me, very surprising. And what we find is that, in fact, to gain speed, and now the task is performed in something less than half a second, okay? To gain speed, we actually do a longer way. And of course, any one of you who would consider your handwriting will recognize that this is actually how we write letters in our own alphabet. And importantly, what I want to say is that at these points, which initially subject and actually stopped completely to plan the next move, she's now almost at maximum speed. Okay, so this would correspond to this, and this here would correspond to this point. And what I'm suggesting is that sometimes in training for this individual, after 8 sessions, so by the 9th session, we have an huge improvement in speed, but this actually comes about by generating 2 new movement trajectories which were not available previously. And if you would look up the papers, you would see that there's no way that by telling someone that this is how the task should be done, we can actually reduce the amount of time that we need for generating these new trajectories. But importantly, this is not a huge gain in speed. This is also perfect accuracy. So none of the targets is actually needed. And what we get is actually we get fluency. Movement which is very, very fluent, which is why probably we also do when we handwrite ourselves, we also have these loops in movement, although it does lengthen the path that needs to be taken. So these movement primitives are scalable, they are rotation invariant. However, there are, like handwriting, hand-specific. So the trained hand is the only hand that will show the gains in performance. Now, importantly, the number of component movement has been reduced. Let me just remind you, this is automatic performance. So what the number of component movement has been halved from 4 movements to 2. And I would argue this is free of executive resources and working memory. And it also assures fluency, because what we have is really effortless, smooth performance, and not at the cost of accuracy. So let me move on to my 3rd point, which is the last one, and try to argue that, in fact, practice generates new procedural knowledge which is expressed as fluency even in language production. So the task I'm showing the data, again, has been published, and this is work by someone who was here in the room. So this actually relates to an artificial morphological rule, whereby we take a verb within a short utterance, and we add a suffix, and there's also a stress change, according to whether the subject is a living or a non-living agent. Okay? So you can try and test yourself, but the idea is if someone moved, it could be a car moving or a person moving, there would be a different suffix indicating whether the movement was related to a living or a non-living agent. So I'm showing you now long-term training. So this is number of sessions, okay? And there's also, with an arrow here, a retention test, 3-month post-training. And what you can see is performance of 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and adults. And what you see here is the data for repeated items. So these are the items that again and again are presented during practice on the task, and there are 2 tasks. One of them is a judgment task, and you can see that all age groups improve, although it's very clear if you look at the accuracy data, and if you look at the speed data that, of course, adults are better learners than the 8-year-old. They actually also outperform the 12-year-old. And there's also, however, a production task where, once again, you can see that all three age groups actually show very convincing improvement in terms of accuracy, not at a cost, in fact, with an improvement or large gains in speed. So this is actual production of the verb with the rule. And what you can see also that when following this training protocol, all three groups show very effective retention. Perhaps again, the 8-year-olds do worse. What I'm showing you here is performance of the three age groups, but now for new items. So these are items that are encountered just once during the whole training protocol. So during the whole period, there are some words on which you are required to either judge or produce the artificial rule and apply the rule. And what you can see is that here, in fact, children fail very much, so there are a chance level in the judgment task throughout. However, you can see that adults and the 12-year-old improve in the task and in a way transferring the knowledge to new items. And you can also see that adults are very good in gaining speed, so in fact they do gain fluency, they improve both in response speed and in accuracy. This is also true if you look at production, where you can see that adults are very good in improving in terms of accuracy, and you can see that on average they show huge improvements in speed. Once again, good retention later on. The point, however, that I want to raise is that the average learning curve, which you can see here and here, this is for reaction time, this is for verbal reaction time, production time, and this is for accuracy. The average learning curve for the adults is actually hiding important individual effect. And I drew a cartoon of them, and what I'm showing you is actually data for two representative idealized subjects. And what I'm showing you is that by the time that subject discover the rule, okay, actually have explicit knowledge of it and can report it, they're actually becoming very slow. Importantly, however, is that this slowing is then followed by a very smooth return to the skill, implicit learning type of learning curve. So what I would argue is that after the discovery of the rule, that rule becomes embedded into the knowledge base. And what we have is we have now proceduralization of something that initially was explicit knowledge. And so fluency, or speed and effortless efficiency, is what really is gained during most of the training process. Okay? So here's my summary. What I would like to argue is that skill learning is, in a way, or can be thought as a series of experience-driven cellular and systems level processes that actually lead to qualitative and long-lasting changes in the brain. Now, the attainment of fluency is, I would argue, a generative process. So in fact, it is something that we need to invest in programs of multi-session training, but this process would then lead not only to quantitative changes in performance, but actually to new knowledge, that is, qualitative changes in the available knowledge. And anyone who goes through a proceduralization process, hopefully, may end with something new. So it's a generative process with new knowledge, new way to solve the task. So although it might seem that initially and at the end of training we were writing the same letter, we actually do something completely different. I hope I convinced you at least that in terms of the motor movement. I would argue that this is also what we do in terms of reading. So although reading is what children would do when they are initially exposed to that, it's quite different from what adults would do when they are highly trained. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. I just want to say one thing for our guests before the questions is that at 4:45, the taxi is going to wait outside to take you to the hotel. And at 5 to 7, wait for us at the lobby. We'll come and take you to the restaurant.
So the familiar becomes the driving force.
Yeah,
Or what? Yeah.
I think that one of the problem is really to break the book in order to somehow activate or learn music.
I completely agree. I'm not sure if, so the point is that I completely agree with the notion that these mechanisms can generate very effective habits or skills, but they're just as effective in generating bad habits and skills. Okay, so the point is that they are going to embed a bad routine also. So this is, importantly, I think what this means is that when we set up intervention programs, we have to take into consideration the fact that, as in all branches of medicine or biological interventions, the same drug, the same intervention at the same dose might be harmful to some people. And I think that it's possible that what is a very effective or reasonably effective school experience, okay, for acquiring reading, and if you have a certain setup in your language or brain system, it could also be the case that for other children, this very same training experience, for one reason or another, not that I know what are the critical factors, is going to turn out a factor or an experience that is pushing towards bad habits or bad reading habits. Now, it could be because of internal factors, it could be because of the interaction of the specific way that we teach reading or other skills. So what I'm saying is that I completely agree with your analysis, and I think that these processes are there. If we harness them or if we trigger them by an effective training experience, we could get highly effective skills. We could also have very bad habits. It's the same mechanism, I think. So if it's repeated enough, and if you require enough repetitions, and you repeat a bad process, or you do the task in some truncated manner, then you're going to end up with a system which actually solves the problem in a different way. The point, however, The second point to it is that it would be more difficult to retrain. And I would suggest that it would be as difficult to retrain as anyone else that has previous skills and habits, which means everyone. I'm not at all sure that by necessity people with developmental problems will actually have more problems than, I don't know, when I'm supposed to learn a new language. So I'm not at all sure that this is true. But it's going to be more and more difficult the more advanced I am in the generation of effective routines for my old task or my old solution or my previous problems.
It's not necessarily bad habits. It's more than to break the rules. You have a lot of learn something that can easily be different. That is very hard to accept in general.
And it could be that this is the best routine possible given the brain constraints that they have. I don't know. But it is definite that we can teach bad habits.